Quarantine, day 31. Morale is dangerously low. Supplies are scarce, and alternate foods will need to be found soon. The desire for human touch is growing. It seems that paranoia has set in. And with it, a little bit of insanity as well.
Truly, these days, the only thing keeping me sane are these books. If not for the books, I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I would do. Hey everybody, Professor Simons here. Today in this video I want to go over some of the answers and some of the explanation for the homework assignments I've been giving you out in the past couple weeks. I've given you some feedback and I've given you some explanations, but now I want to cover a lot of the big things I keep seeing wrong. So this is a very important video. Please watch this entire thing. There will be some things I cover that you're like, yeah, I know, I've learned this since kindergarten. There'll be something in this video that you'll need to be reminded of, but these are some problems that I keep seeing over and over again. And we're going to start by talking about the homework assignment. It was the grammar checkpoint. That is the homework assignment from the 6th. So let's go over some things. So let's start by talking about the grammar checkpoint homework. This was due on the 6th. This is some of the basics that we have covered before, definitely, but I keep seeing mistakes. First question I asked is, what two things do you need to make a complete sentence? And a lot of you said a capital letter and a period. And technically you're correct, except for that's kind of like the elementary school, the middle school level of what you need in a sentence. I'm saying, what do you need inside a sentence for it to be correct? And here's the answer I was looking for. You need a subject and a predicate. So let's take this sentence. I am stuck at home. That is technically a complete and correct sentence because you've got the subject, I, that's the thing that's doing the action, and you've got the predicate, the verb, the action. In this case, am. I am stuck at home. Complete sentence because it has a subject, predicate, also happens to have a capital letter and a period at the end. Good? Even in more complicated sentences, as long as you have those two things, you're on the right track. So, in the middle of the night, I go walking in my sleep. It's a great song. Do you have a subject? Yeah, and in fact, the subject is the same thing. It's I. I am the thing doing something in this sentence. And what is the predicate? What is the action? Go, or probably go walking. So two sentences here, both of them are complete because they've got the subject, the predicate, they also happen to have capital and a period at the end. Next, let's talk about fragments and run-ons. If you have two complete sentences and you just shove them together, that's probably wrong. So if we take out this period and it says, I am stuck at home, in the middle of the night I go walking in my sleep, now it's a run-on because you've got two complete sentences that you're just sort of jamming together. The one that surprisingly I'm seeing more problems with is fragments. So this here, in the middle of the night, that is now a fragment because you do not have a subject and you do not have a predicate. There's no verb, there's no subject, there's nothing there. That would be a fragment. Here's the type of example I see much more commonly though. I see your fragments in the middle of a longer sentence. So, there was a big storm last night, period. Worst of the year, period. Now we've got one complete sentence, there was a big storm last night, but this second part here is suddenly a fragment because there's no subject, there's no predicate. You're missing something. You could not just go up to a stranger on the street and say, worst of the year, and have it make sense. It won't make sense. But you can fix it really easily. All you need is, it was the worst of the year. Because now you have a subject, it, and you have a predicate, was. The rest of it makes sense. You were just missing the subject and the predicate. Next, let us move on and let's talk about apostrophes. At this point, most of you have figured out its and its, it apostrophe s versus its. So I'm not too worried about that. But now I'm starting to see a lot of you mess up apostrophes when it comes to simple possession. So possession meaning one thing owns another. This is Jeff's pen. That's Jeff's couch. That's Jeff's girlfriend's dog. etc., etc. So there's basically 4 ways this can happen. You've got words that end in S, words that don't end in S, you've got plural, and you've got singular. So let's start with the easy one. A singular word that doesn't end in S. That's most of them. Let's go with dog, because she's right next to me. If one dog has ownership, then the thing you add is really simple. It's just an apostrophe S, because you got a single word, does not end in S. Now let's go with the next one. A plural word that does end in S. This is also pretty simple. Dogs. What do you do if they have some sort of ownership? If there's 4 dogs who all own the same thing? This time, all you're going to add is the apostrophe. So dogs, apostrophe, versus dog, apostrophe S. Next are the 2 kind of complicated ones. Let's say you have a singular word, but that singular word does end in S. For example, let's take my name. My name, Jeff Simons, does happen to end in S. So what do you do if I own something? Jeff Simons' pen, Jeff Simons' crumpled up paper towel. What you're going to do in this case is you're going to either add the apostrophe or the apostrophe and the S. Either one, it does not matter. So far, so good. And last, what do you have a plural word that does not end in S? So let's go with cacti. Why not? If you have 4 cactuses, that is considered cacti. It's plural, but it does not end in S. In this case, you're going to just add apostrophe and S if those cacti own something. So to make it simple, in basically all these examples, to show possession, you're going to add apostrophe S. The only one that's different is right here, if your word already has an S because it's plural. Dogs, friends, parents, anything like that. Let's move on! Okay, let's move on. Next, let's talk about another question on this handout that ended up being pretty tricky, as it turns out. I asked you what things need to be in quotation marks, what things need to be underlined, and what things need to be italicized. And I got a lot of confusing answers here. So let's go over the rule. You've got quotation marks, you've got italics, and you've got underlined. First, these 2 things are the exact same. If you can put something in italics, you can underline it. They are completely interchangeable. The only difference is you're probably going to want to underline if you're writing by hand, italics if you're writing by computer. But these 2 things are the exact same. So now the question is, when do you put things in quotes? When do you do one of these 2 things? And the answer is not that complicated, but it's all about containers and the things that are inside. So containers are the big things, the things that are inside are small. For example, you might have a poem from a book of poetry. You might have a short story from an anthology, a chapter from a book, an episode from a TV show. You might have a piece of art from an art show. That's what I mean when I say the small thing and the big container. The container is the thing that's always going to be in italics or underlined, and the small thing is going to be what is in quotation marks. So in this class, you might have like a article from a journal. The article in quotes, the journal in italics. Or you might have an essay from a newspaper. Essay is the small thing, that's in quotes. The newspaper is the big container, that's italicized or underlined. So, the ones I gave you were movie, book, academic, journal, poem, and website. And the thing is, only poem would be in quotation marks, because only poem is the smaller thing. Everything else is the big container. A movie, a book, an academic journal, or a website. Those all contain the smaller things. So all of those would be in italics or underlined. Only a poem would be in quotation marks. Good? Let's move on. Okay, let's talk about some citation stuff. I know we've covered citations a lot, but again, some mistakes I'm seeing over and over again. These questions came from the MLA citing homework that was from the 3rd. So let's talk about some things. The big problem I saw is, where do you put the in-text citation? So basically, most of you got it down to 1 or 2 answers. Here's one of the answers I gave you. The study showed the results were inconclusive, but we all had hope. My question is this: do you put the citation here after the quote, or here at the end of the sentence? And I'll say I got basically 50-50 on this. Some of you said, yeah, it's fine here. Some of you said, no, it has to go here. Here's the answer. You always want your citation at the end of the sentence. So even though the quote ends here and there's more going, doesn't matter. I want the citation to be right here. So that's where we'll put it. Let's say it's by Landers, page 19. Then a period at the end. So you got the period at the end, you've got the citation, you've got the sentence has a quote in it, you've got a signal phrase, the study showed, you've got your comma, quotation marks, etc., etc. That is what I'm looking for. If you put this citation up here, right after the quote, I'm going to say technically it's wrong. Technically it's not supposed to be there. So always have your citations right at the end of a sentence. Speaking of citations, I cannot believe I'm still seeing this, but citations, you only need 2 things. You need a last name and a page number. No commas, no PG or P or nothing like that. All you need is a name. Let's go with Simon's. That's a great name. And a number. Let's go with 112. That's it. Nothing else. Here's some things I keep seeing. For whatever reason, a lot of you are putting the nation, like Simon's, USA. I don't need to know what nation. I definitely don't need to know the year. This is a thing that's true in APA, but in this class, we are doing MLA, so no year in here. A lot of you are giving me the paragraph number or something like that, and here's the big one. A ton of you are giving me the website URL. So instead of a name and a number, you're giving me like www.newyorktimes.com/whatever. I do not want that. I want 2 things, a name and a number. That's it. Here are the tiny exceptions to that. If you cannot find the number, leave it blank. That's it. If you cannot find a page, then that's all you're doing. By the way, page numbers are not really as complicated as they seem. You're only going to give me the page number if you see it at the top corner of the actual page itself. It's not your job to count like 1, 2, 3. Oh, it must be page 3. If it doesn't say 3 on the corner, leave it blank. So here's an example. This is a book I have. This is a short story. The short story starts here. This is page 2. So some of you might say 2. It's the second page of the short story. But I found it on page, 357 or something. So that is going to be the page that I cite, 357. Not page 2 or section 6, none of that. You're going to give me the number that's in the top corner of the thing. No ifs or exceptions. That's what you're going to do. If there's no number, leave it blank. If there is, that's the number. And the other complicating thing is, what if you do not have a name? What if you're citing a website or something like that? In that case, you're going to give me the most specific thing you can find. And almost always, that's going to be the name of the article. So let's say the name of the article is Fishing and You. I don't know. If that's the name of the article, then that's the citation. Fishing and You in quotation marks because that's the smaller thing. If your article title is super long, like 40 words long, you're probably only going to be the first 3 words. That's all I need. 3 words, quotation marks, that's basically it. So, in your in-text citation, super simple. Name and number. If you can't find a number, just a name. If you can't find a name, article title. That is it. Nothing else. You guys are killing me here. Make it as simple as you can. Good? Let's move on. Next, one of the last homework assignments I just gave you, I think last week, was about defining terms and transition sentences. And you guys did great on this. But let's still review really briefly. A transition sentence just says, hey, dummy, we're going from this idea to this idea. That's it. So one of the examples I gave you was, elephants were used in the Second Punic War. By the way, you can see me squinting because I'm losing my eyesight. It's terrible. Elephants were used in the Second Punic War to transport military personnel and weaponry. The next paragraph is, elephants have been celebrated circus performers for years. So, what's the transition sentence? It's something super simple. It could just be, but elephants weren't always used for war. That's it, because now the reader knows, still talking about elephants, but now we're talking about a different purpose. And when it comes to defining your terms, this one, again, pretty well done, but all you need to know is you just have to define, by the way, look at my dog. She's hungry. So when it comes to defining terms, all you need to do is define any term that's in your thesis that the average person might not know. So the good news is it can't hurt to define things. It's never going to be a bad thing if you over-define, but you only need to define the things that might be unknown or might be vague. So horror movie, that might be vague. Candy, that might be vague. Pop music, that might be vague. If your definition for pop music is just music that is popular, that gets really, really iffy. Beethoven is really popular with a very specific group of people. Is that pop music? Probably not. Or if pop music is just music that is heard on a daily basis. People hear the theme song for Jeopardy basically every day. Does that make the Jeopardy theme song pop music? I don't think so. So, the way you define a term might influence how you actually write the paper. It's important that you do that straight up. Okay, and then we had yesterday, I gave you the bibliography homework. When I say bibliography, I really just mean works cited page. So we've already kind of talked about works cited pages a little bit, but here's some questions that make it a little bit clearer. First, I said, what order should you put the listings in your bibliography? Most of you said alphabetical by author's last name. But there's a little trick to that, which is, what if you do not have an author's last name? Much like your in-text citation, that usually just means you're going to leave it off. So how do you then alphabetize it? So the real answer was actually E, alphabetical by the first thing you mention in your citation. And here's what I mean by that. Here's an example of a bibliography. By the way, I know I'm saying bibliography weird because it's hard to say that word fast and not sound like you're muttering. Blah, 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 blah. But take a look at this sample I gave you. You will notice the second to last example on the page, there is no author. It is saved from drowning. So you're just going to alphabetize that as S because that's the first thing we have, saved from drowning. But everything else, if you have a last name, you're going to put it in order based on that last name. Make sense? Next question, I said, what should the citations look like? And they should look just like this. They should look double-spaced. You'll notice everything is double-spaced, including the title and in-between citations. You should have the first line always flush with the margin, and every line after that should be indented once. There's no bullets, there's no numbers. It just looks exactly like this. It's called hanging indents. But practice this because a lot of you are still sending me works cited pages that look real weird. Then I asked a tough question, which is, when you have two or more authors, what order do you put their last names? And a lot of you said alphabetical order. That's actually not true. You're going to put it in order based on the way you see it in the actual thing. And let's take a look at an example here. The third from last listing on this works cited page has two authors, Charles Ruaz and Judith Brenner. Even though Brenner is alphabetically ahead of Ruaz, if Ruaz's name is first, that's what we're going to keep it with. Next, another little bit of a trick question. I said, what should you title your works cited page? Should it be references? Should it be works cited? Should it be bibliography? And the answer is, it could be any of them. Any of them as long as there's no formatting, no underline, no nothing. So finally, let's take a look at this flawed example of a works cited page. Many of you caught some of the big issues. The biggest one would be David Gates. His name is in all capital letters. That should not be the case. Another really obvious one, works cited is underlined. Like I just said, works cited should not be underlined. Some problems that were way harder to spot or notice. If you look at the second listing, The Balloon by Donald Barthelme, the title is both in quotes and in italics. And that is wrong. You cannot have something that's in quotes and italics. Either it's the big container or it's the small thing that came from that big container. Some other inconsistencies. You'll notice that on the end of most of these citations, I either have print, meaning I have a print copy, or web, meaning I found it on the web. But the one citation from Dave Eggers doesn't have either. That's inconsistent because either it would be print or web. So if I'm going to use that, I need to use that throughout. And here are two problems I'm seeing all the time, over and over again. So let's look at the listing for Larry McCafferty. You've got Partisan Review twice, and there's a misspelling, so one of the two is wrong. But even on the surface, you'd never need the same information listed twice. I think some of you are listing it the first time as like the name of a journal or a website, and the second time as the name of the organization. If they're the same thing, don't give me both. Just give me once, and spell it correctly, preferably. And right above it, you'll see one really confusing thing. Right above it on the J.D. O'Hara listing, there's a spot that says EBSCO host. What is that? That's actually the name of the database on which I found this article. I found it using EBSCO, which is another name for Academic Search Premier. You never need that. Okay, and last, before I sign out, 3 things that I keep seeing in a lot of your papers. One of them is try to avoid using the URL of a website whenever possible. It's never great to use the URL for an in-text citation. It's never great to use it really in any case. You might be able to use the name as the name of the website, but not the URL. So what I mean by that is, instead of saying facebook.com, you would just say Facebook. Instead of saying wikipedia.org, you would just say Wikipedia. So try not to give me the entire URL, just give me the name of the organization or the website or the entity. So again, instead of like the NewYorkTimes.com,
the New York Times.
Another thing that I see on a lot of persuasive essays, if you're trying to prove your thesis, make sure all of the sources you quote also agree with your thesis. So many of you quoted from the article, "It's Time to Pay College Athletes" by Sean Gregory. Obviously, his article is titled, "It's Time to Pay College Athletes." You know what his point of view is. He wants to pay college athletes. So if your thesis is that you should not pay college athletes, you pretty much should never quote from his article. His article directly will argue with whatever you want to use from it. So make sure whatever source you use either agrees with your thesis or at the very least doesn't go and do the exact opposite. And finally, I'm fine with you copy and pasting. It makes life a lot easier if you copy and paste from like RefWorks or EasyBib. That's probably okay. If you copy and paste a quote from an article, that saves you a lot of time in typing. But one thing that I'm seeing a lot is minor font changes or minor style changes when you've copy and pasted something. So here's a perfect example of what I'm looking at. You'll notice that it's subtle, but suddenly there's a light gray halo around every word you've just written. That shows me you copy and pasted. Like I said, copy and pasting is fine, but make sure you change the format so at least there's no weird gray shadow next to every single word. Alright everybody, thank you very much for watching. I know there was a lot of scattered information here. Hopefully it helps in the last couple of papers. Like I said, let me know if you have any questions or concerns as we get closer to the finish line of this semester. So you're doing great. Let me know if you have any questions.